having a Coca-Cola was empowered. She was, that kind of control, which was all in that day and age a black woman could wage, was um, empowerment, and that was a global message for people of color and women in particular everywhere. I had the fortune to do a very large pro bono uh, work. I was an executive at Nielsen, and I had the fortune of working with Mrs. Obama to do a very large pro bono campaign to encourage people to drink more water. And what we know about effective messaging is that, and this is from a technique that is used commonly by Coca-Cola and every company around the world, called neuromarketing, right? They go in, they don't depend on how you consciously ingest messaging. They look at your brain. How does it light up? How emotionally attached are you to it? How memorable is it? Good messaging should be memorable, actionable, and achievable. And so as you think about, don't say to somebody, and I'm going to show you this campaign, drink 8 more glasses of water a day in your health campaign. That's not really achievable for many people. But drink one more glass of water. So we know that from neurotesting language that works. And so I ask you to think about what is the emotional resonance of your message to your audiences, and how do you compel them? And you feel it, you know when something is resonating emotionally for you. So think about that. Okay, so let's show the second clip. This was the Drink Up campaign. This is just the results from the first year working with.
The First Lady raises her glass to toast water.
Michelle Obama held her own pep rally for H2O inside the Watertown High School gym, trying to encourage students to drink even 1 glass of water a day.
When you drink water, you drink. We've got a very special message from First Lady Michelle Obama.
Today, I'm working to inspire Americans of all ages to drink more water.
Drink up, I've always said that, and now I'm applying it to water.
1 more glass of water a day? But then I'd be drinking 1 glass of water a day.
First Lady says drink up.
Drink up, everybody.
Drink up, cheers.
Thank you very much.
When you drink water, you drink up.
You drink up.
Making an easy choice is as easy as a drink of water.
Drink water, drink water.
You are what you drink, and when you drink water, you are at your best.
Drink up.
Drink up, drink up.
Drink up.
So not everybody has Mrs. Obama, admittedly, to influence their campaign, right? But everybody has a leader in their community. Everybody has a culture in their community. And this is what's known as having used earned media. This was not paid media. This was going to people and convincing them to work together in their communities for a single message, and get it into their media. Social media, obviously very important. So I'll stop there because my time's up. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. Both of those ads were really powerful because what they did is they leaned into what we call influencers. Of course, Michelle Obama, very, big influence on our society, on children, on women, on families, positive image, positive body image. So she elevates anything she elevates, people are going to stand up and listen. And Karen, to your point, leaning into earned media. Once you have that name, the media wants to listen. Oh, what's Michelle Obama talking about? And then you've seen the word activation on the screen. How do we activate our communities to get involved? How do we tap into the lived experience? So you've seen the youth, they're exercising, they're, rapping and promoting and dancing and drinking water. They're making it fun. So you're meeting those communities and those people that you hope to impact, you're meeting them where they're at. Where do they digest their content? IG. Where do they watch the news? And so it's kind of bringing those things full circle. Now, to your point, not everybody has Michelle Obama or Viola Davis, but you do have leaders in your community that have some notoriety, that have name, and that have some pull to get the community activated around your cause. So I'm going to stop there, and I want to throw to the audience and see. We've been talking a lot. Is there anything that stood out? Any thoughts? Any questions? Yeah. Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a great flag. That's a great flag.
Yeah, what she's saying is seeing the corporate involvement turned her off. But if you notice that there was a lot more than just corporate involvement. So there was the California Endowment for the Humanities. There was the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. In fact, and for every one of those, there were local mayors. It's too much to explain now. Local mayors, local, there were governors, there were it was a multi-stakeholder collaboration. And the truth is that especially when it comes to health, it's going to be difficult to change the health trajectory without the involvement of the people who are ruining our health. And really, frankly, the only product we could pick for various numbers of reasons was water, because Coca-Cola is not going to say to you, well, we don't want to do, because they all had water companies. So it was kind of they didn't want to. They're much more successful if you're drinking Coke, right? But they couldn't legitimately say they had no vested interest in it. So that was a sweet spot of finding, how you could turn their own machine against themselves. And that's what makes it strategic, right? That is what you have to think about. How can because everybody has to have an interest when they're involved in it. And so what is the interest that I can use that's aligned with my interest where we can meet? That's what multi-stakeholder collaborating is, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Mhm. Wait, can you tell me, what did she get turned on by? What, could you stand up?
Truck.
A truck?
A raffle.
Like raffling them
Oh,
off.
oh, a raffle for a truck? Yay!
And quite honestly, we've got conversations.
Right.
One of our other centers gets funding. So we don't, that's not too crazy of a thought.
Right.
From her. So I'm looking for these influencers.
But so now Ford has an interest because it's kind of free advertising for
Mhm.
them for the price of a truck, which they would pay for, that's about the cost of what they would pay, to do an ad that's earned, and so this is earned media for them.
Mhm.
Exactly right.
Have you also thought about enlisting the help of the universities, the local universities? There are a lot of student activists that are very vocal across the country that are willing to, be influencers of such, develop rallies, develop community events that get the young people involved. There's influencers on Instagram as well as TikTok. And you would just, kind of Google, go into like your area and tap them. They're always usually activated in being a part of an effort that brings in the local community, that also brings in like local mayor. It's try to pull together the leaders of your community and then create a trickle down effect is what I'm trying to say.
I think I'd add one thing as well, which is, especially with younger generations, simple single messages on social media that are consistent. So do they care about having a stake in their future? Just really simple phrasing that you can kind of get in the feed on a regular basis with a lot of visual interest and intrigue. Make sure the message itself isn't gonna get to them alone, right? So you've got to have something that calls them in, and once they see that design, and then all of a sudden the message is upon them, and it really does resonate over time if they can continue to see that consistency around, I do actually kind of care about my future. I might not like listening to media or the news. I might not like either of these political candidates. I might not feel like I have much of a voice in our political system in this moment in time. But I do care about what happens to me and my community and our environment and things like that. So sometimes on social media, I see kind of lengthy messages or big block paragraphing, or sometimes there's nothing that's visually appealing. And even if those messages are so important and so powerful, especially to us who might be writing them, right? We love our mission, right? We're all about it. But how do you get people who aren't in your organization to care? And so sometimes it's just making sure that you are using an economy of words to deliver that messaging as one simple idea that you can digest even in the subconscious, and make sure you keep putting that message out there. It's not enough to do it once, and a social media strategy isn't just making sure you're posting something once a week, right? Be intentional about those short phrases that you come up with that are most important to the mission you're trying to accomplish for younger audiences.
I have a question related to that. So messaging in the professional advertising world, a lot of resources, time, and energy goes into figuring out what message works.
That's right.
And for us, we don't have that kind of time. We don't have resources to figure that out. So, to your point, how do you figure out the message? You don't have the time and resources to do the focus groups, to do the testing, to do all of the stuff.
Market research, yeah.
I think that is a misconception at some level.
Yeah, help me.
So I do. I think that there's a lot of data out there that's free, that's collected by government and collected by local governments. And so, what you learn, and you guys probably know this, you can pretty much tell by a person's zip code almost a lot about them from where they live. So you kind of, and the census data track, that's your baseline research, right? So it's great, because that then helps you narrow down who you don't need to talk to and who you do need to talk to. That's one. And then in terms of doing the research on what resonates, there's a whole social media world out there that if you're just observant, and actually there's also a lot of free market research out there and free research on what different demographics, different age groups think, different gender groups think, different racial groups think. So Google it, you know, what do millennials think of fill in the blank? And then observe. Go on Instagram, go on TikTok, put in the thing that you're interested in and see how people are talking about it. That gives you a good sense of how to align your message around how to talk about it, how to take advantage of what the discussion is. You understand? Because it moves so quickly, right? I mean, about influencers, I don't know a single influencer who doesn't want to be paid something.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
we've done some research on that. There's just
Yeah.
no, you gotta pay them.
Yeah. Oh,
Even
absolutely.
the most
Absolutely.
socially
Yeah.
impactful, dedicated
Absolutely.
influencers.
And we encourage that.
They
We
wanna be
encourage,
paid.
they shouldn't work for free.
Yeah, and by
they're-
the way, there's a disproportionate pay
Yeah.
scale for influencers
of
who are
color.
minority
Yeah,
versus
exactly.
influencers who are white.
And
So,
I was going to add to that too, the exact little project you just put together to
Yes.
do. You don't do it. Get a college get a college student to do that.
this one's on.
Call one of my students; they'll do it. That's a great project for them to do.
Find a
for
marketing
your-
student and give them credit for it, you know?
Yeah, and that's what I meant by tapping into your universities and your college students. They're activated and they're ready to do this work. And that's where I got to the free. It could be college credit. Influence that are actual influencers with a following absolutely want to be paid and should be paid. But if you can create an incentive for a college student that already has a voice, already has a following, is already embedded in this work, is tapped into organizations such as ACLU or voting rights organizations locally, that's half the battle. Another thing to your point, Karen, understanding, doing your research, but then I think as an organization, putting together a plan, a strategic plan. So once you're capturing these insights, you're now identifying who your audience is. You're identifying how to reach your audience. Pull that all together in a strategic plan. So that's your roadmap. Okay, I know I can reach these people on IG. These are the messages I'm seeing them respond to or activate on. These are the messages I need to keep in mind. And then creating content that is evergreen. So what you want to do by evergreen, I mean, you want to create content that is timely. Of course, we have to respond to timely events in this country that can data piece. But just introducing your work, introducing your mission, your values, that's evergreen content that you can continue to promote throughout the year. So you're not repeating drafting, you're not repeating development. You're taking, say, an op-ed or a blog, and you're creating different pieces of taglines and little sizzle messages that pique the interest of your audience on social. You're driving them to that same piece, but you can't assume once it's published, oh, I've captured all my audience, they've seen this is old content. When you're looking at those metrics, bounce rates, people will get on your site, they'll read the first paragraph and they're gone. So repeatable content that you already have in your arsenal. Keep it moving, keep pushing it out, maybe restructure it a little bit. This helps cut down your capacity internally, so you're not focused on, oh my God, I have another blog to draft, but then you also want to make sure having that editorial calendar so that you can strike when it's hot. We're coming into an election. We've all known this election was going to happen. So having that plan in place to say, I need to start developing content that's election focused and talking to my audience about what they need to know, what's on the ballot, what's at stake. We need to get them out to vote. Really starting that activation process and knowing at the top of the year, you're coming out of the summer, starting that activation process. So I noticed when we support our clients, a lot of our building their capacity is really putting it on paper. Because a lot of times people are reactive. They're reacting to the moment. Oh my God, it's almost November and I don't have anything up about the election. I'm not talking about it. I'm not visual. I'm not present. And so it's backing into these states by having it written down early on.
I think we were gonna do a work session, right? They were gonna.
Well,
do-
let's, we have a couple more questions.
what-
if we
okay.
Can I say one more
Yeah.
thing about data? It's going to be hard for me to do a session like this without talking about data because I think data is the most important.
That gets actually to the next
Tool.
question, so this is perfect.
Okay, great.
This is a perfect segue. Because what I was going to say is talk a little bit about how data builds the narrative and how it helps shift mindset, changes minds, or how it helps advocate for what the impacts that we're trying to move the needle on. Perfect.
Okay, so I think to go back to your question and expand on that a little bit more, there's the big media out there, right? But there's also the media we own our own data for, which is social media. So you can go out to places. So think about vendors. Is it really expensive to go get Hootsuite or to enlist someone like Cision or something like that? The answer is yes, and sometimes that's out of reach for a nonprofit. It's out of reach for a startup entrepreneur, right? That's just trying to get themselves off the ground, and maybe they're not even paying themselves yet, so they're definitely not going out and paying some of these high dollar vendors. However, these vendors have so many free resources on audience,
Absolutely.
on messaging.
Totally.
So if you've not checked out resource sections on some of these big data vendor platforms like Hootsuite for the social media side, Cision for they bleed into the PR side, so you can understand how to marry your PR side of things and your communication strategy with the work you're doing on social media. Part of it is chunking, like Nicole was talking about. So if you go out and write an article, or you have a press release, or an op-ed, something like that, that's a big piece of content that you can chunk out into multiple messages, and maybe that turns out to be 10 posts over the course of several weeks or something like that. So don't try to reinvent the wheel. If you create a great piece of content, figure out how to repurpose that that's appropriate for certain channels, right? That you can say longer pieces of information and messaging on your website, on your blog. Those are owned media sources, right? They're not sponsored, they're not earned, they're owned. You control what that messaging is, and then you repurpose that messaging for social media. You repurpose that maybe for a news interview if you've got a thought leader that's going to be quoted or something like that. So I think that's one way to help do more with less resources, both money and talent, the people you have on the ground to do the work. Last thing, I want to relate that back to data. So you can get the metadata from some of those companies that I just described. It's free. They're resource sections. You don't even have to partner or pay for them. Go get them. They're important. That's going to tell you a lot about the type of messaging that's working effectively in this moment for each particular type of industry, if it's education or healthcare or child welfare services, whatever that happens to be. Your data in your social media, and again, use an intern for this, or if you've got someone dedicated within your system to do it, high school students, NHS departments, whatever you have access to in your community. But if you're running a strategic social media campaign like Nicole mentioned, and you've papered out what you're trying to accomplish, what that messaging is going to be, do some A/B testing. All that data is yours inside your accounts.
Yeah.
You just have to have someone to take the time to go in and mine it, analyze it, and learn how to turn that into applied knowledge, right? How do you translate that data from what's happening in your social media? Why did this one get so much reach, but this one didn't when they seemed similar? Or why did 100 people engage with this and only 3 people with that? Start monitoring that. Do A/B testing. Figure out what's really resonating with your audience. That'll help you understand when you need to evolve the message. It'll help you understand what's effective. And if you do that on a regular basis, you can also start understanding why something works on Twitter differently than it might play out on Instagram. Those channels operate differently. Different types of users expect different things on those channels. And so it's important that when you're creating that strategy, you might have the one blanket message that you need to get out there, but you also need to take the time to figure out, how do I tweak that a little for Twitter? Because maybe Twitter is more of a 20 to 40 career-aged audience. Maybe it's more predominantly men, right? Instagram might be a younger audience. Facebook is primarily older and it's more female. So even though the message at its core is going to be the same, the way that you deliver that is going to be slightly different. And taking the couple minutes it takes to mine that data, analyze it, and figure out how to deploy it across your strategy and evolve that over time is going to be so worth your effort. And guess what? That's all free. I mean, outside of the resources you're going to have to find to get it done, but it's not going to cost you any money, and no one else has access to that data inside your own channels the same way you do. So, yeah, so that's a really great question. So maybe you want to put a message out there, drink up. Maybe the an A version of that campaign might be the way that she put that message out the first time, but maybe a B version of that removes some of those corporate sponsorships, and then you can monitor.
It's side by side.
Exactly.
Side by side
which one
comparison.
performs better.
And then you can see, wow, people, this really, even though you're kind of saying the same thing, this one really resonated and that one didn't. And then that helps you over time. You start building up a treasure chest of what your core audience, your core stakeholders are responding to. And it also helps you understand, like Karen said earlier, what audiences are making you spin your wheels chasing and which audiences are actually going to move the needle for what you're trying to accomplish. And you have to be able to discern that, because an effective message isn't for everyone, right?
Can I also mention, and once you have that research and understand what's resonating, to what Katie does, find the person
The lived experience.
who basically, what's it called, who is emblematic of that, who is representative of that feeling, and have them present a compelling first-person narrative so you understand that that's going to represent a lot of how many people feel, and potentially then become socially viral.
Can you talk a little
voice.
bit to because I'm really big on, when we're dealing with systemic inequities, hearing the voice of those that have been impacted. We can have a lot of, professors and smart thinking in the room, but if we don't have the people who are directly at the center of the change that we want to see happen, I think it's all for nothing. So can you talk a little bit about how you elevate that and bring that into your...
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think if you want to basically use or appropriate someone's story to then, and I think a lot of us are working with vulnerable groups or people in precarity on some level, asking them to share their story is something you need to think about in terms of the ethics of doing that, and are they only being used for the advertising, or are they also at the table making decisions with you about the work that you're doing? And so just kind of thinking through that. I'm not saying don't do it, it's just kind of thinking through it. And really, one of the things that strikes me a lot about the United Nations, which is an entity I follow, think through, work with a lot in the work that we do serving refugee and migrant communities, is their use of images of people who are in precarious conditions. And so there's this sort of double-edged sword of that gets a message out there, and it's quite effective. But I'm also interested in how they're used and who's doing the advertising in that, and how those images get reappropriated or used. What position is a body in that is precarious? Is it an asset-based data point, or is it a deficit-based or a trauma-based data point? And so I think being really careful about, yes, the message might be compelling and interesting to multiple audiences, but to what end, and is this really serving your organization and the people that you're trying to serve?
Can I just mention something about that? So we know from research that deficit framing of messages really does not work. People detach. It's too emotionally difficult when you frame a message from a deficit. If I'm saying, if you're fat, you're gonna have your legs cut off, your drink, that's not working. People emotionally detach, they cannot internalize the message. So most messages in marketing and aside from political communication, which is different because it triggers the amygdala, and that's my group against your group. That's how it's different. The deficit framing of a message, when you want people to take an action, you're much better framing it in a positive positive way.
Yeah.
And so, and of course, you have to have people participating in a campaign, not using them.
And as you're thinking about the framing, and this is particularly important when you're working in the voting space and voting rights, be careful you're not repeating barriers or you're not repeating misinformation. So if you're trying to dispel that something is not true, you wouldn't repeat the thing that is not true in your ad. Because guess what people are going to see? Just the thing that is not true. And they're going to miss the fact that you're dismantling that barrier. People, you have to think about how people digest their news. We are busy. We are moving at, rapid speed. And so when we see something cross our phone, it might be that one thing that you don't want them to believe that they walk away believing. So when you're thinking about asset framing, you're thinking about giving them the good information, the good communication at the top. You don't even need to bring in the bad stuff, right? Because they're going to see it anyway. Giving them resources so that to learn more or to understand your rights or whatever it is, click here, and then taking them to that next landing page to maybe debunk. You could have like a page, a PDF that says debunking the myths or debunking the untruths or things like that. That's your reader that has a little bit more time because they're taking time to click through. But in those quick sizzling messages, social media, you want to think about how you make that person walk away feeling empowered. You want to think about framing. So when you think about asset framing, there are a number of ways that the media leans into deficit framing. And a lot of times we don't even know that that's being done. Where criminal justice rights are concerned, talking about returning citizens as felons, that's deficit framing. Instead of painting them as a father, a citizen, a taxpayer, a college graduate, we're leaning into the mistake that they made and we're not framing them in a positive way. So you want to always be aware of how you're framing your messages to get to your people. Sorry, you guys had questions over here.
How do you build messaging around a very complex and painful issue like gun violence? How do you make sure that the people who need to hear that message, the folks who are selling guns to kids, the kids who are picking up guns to solve disputes or problems or just to garner respect, how do you ensure that they are getting that message? And how can you tell if behaviors are changing and communities are safer, kids are understanding their value and their worth and their potential through social media?
Who's your audience? I would say, is your audience the gun seller? Probably not, right?
My audience is primarily the kids.
The kids, so that's
and the parents and adults who reinforce this crazy notion that this is an okay way to be.
So we have a thought in the way we think about strategic comms, and Jennifer, you let me know. We have our people, we call them, these are our people. They're gonna believe they're in our corner. They are promoting what we're promoting. We're all drinking from the same well. We have our middle of the fence. I don't know, maybe gun violence is not because of this or that, but maybe, you know what, I'm hearing what they're saying over here. They can be swayed. And then we have our people that are just not our people. And so with our campaigns, we spend the time getting to our people and our middle of the fence. That could be through the school administration. That could be through all of the people and organizations that care about the health and well-being of this child. That person touting and selling that gun cares about their bottom line and their profit. They're probably not going to be our people. So we gear our campaigns to gun safety for how do you keep your children safe? How do you keep your children safe and their friends safe? We gear our campaigns to the school system. How do you make sure we're keeping guns out of school? How are we keeping our children safe when they're in your care? It's in their best benefit to make sure that they have a safe place for students to learn. So they are also our people. We focus our audiences on who can move the needle, policy advocacy, some of our policymakers, who are our people in that space that can help listen to the data, see the data, and how dangerous this is to have guns just floating around and make some policy change. That's how we identify, and that's how we gear our campaigns.
And I think the other piece of that, you talked about the audience element. The other element, who's the audience? Who's the messenger? Okay, this is critical, and you mentioned on that a little bit, but once you've identified who that audience is and what you're trying to communicate, who you're trying to pull in, who you're speaking to that's already on your side, and who you know you're never going to win over. That's piece one. Piece two, we listen to people that inspire us, right? We listen to people we feel like we can trust, that seem credible, that have authentic experience with the issue that we're talking about. So think about your messenger. Just putting things out there from a brand perspective or a generalized, framework, that's not going to be as impactful and as powerful as coming from a thought leader within your organization. Think about how inspiring it is to hear Dr. Gail Christopher speak, right? Think about the difference in that power than if it just comes from a brand. They might be saying the same words, but it's not the same as hearing her say it directly to you. And so find a way to make sure that your audience knows where those messages are coming from, who specifically is speaking to that audience, right? And why they're the right authority to be speaking on that issue. Maybe it's because they're the leader of your nonprofit. Maybe it's because they've, had some kind of lived experience that makes them qualified to speak on the issue. So always make sure when you're creating a strategy that you're thinking about the audience and you're thinking about that delivery method. Who is the right spokesperson to ensure that your audience is not only impacted, but inspired by what you're trying to put out there?
So there's actually been some testing. The Ad Council did a campaign on for gun safety. And when they started, what they discovered was like people were hardening in their opinions. But they rewrote the ad, and what they did was very clever. And I actually have to go and see the ads. I just know this anecdotally from the people who actually did the testing, is that they put kids in grown-up clothing, and they just had them talk about guns. And so every adult looking at that ad could see themselves in that young child. So there have been, so I'm just telling you that is not about intellectually thinking about the policy or the this or the that. That is about thinking about, I was once that young child, and that was an emotional, you have to find the emotional resonance, the thing that triggers that feeling, not the, I know this is the day of the mind, not the heart, but messaging is about the heart.
And that, what you're saying there, that example is a perfect example of having the right messenger, right? Kids impacted by gun violence, it's hard not to listen to them as a messenger on why this is important, right? You can listen, right? You can listen to policymakers, you can listen to nonprofits, you can listen to lots of people that are very compassionate about moving the needle on gun violence, but you listen to some kids talk about the way it's impacting their lives every day. People will tune in longer. If you do that in a short video, you'll see longer retention rates. And that's because you've not only hit the empathetic power of the message, but you've also done it with the right messenger, right? And you've hit the right audience because we're trying to speak to the adults who can do something about it, right?
I have it's not a question, but something I'd like to offer as a resource going back to the conversation about tapping into your local universities. So I'm with Dallas TLHT, and we have an intern this summer through a company, an organization, they're a New Orleans-based equity organization called ePluger's Unum, and they have what's called the Unum Academy, and it is a paid internship for students in the South. And so the money didn't have to come from our budget. We don't believe in free labor at our organization, so we would never have an intern or anybody working for us that isn't compensated, but their organization pays for the intern. And what they do is they match the student with based on their area of study, with the area of work that you are doing. And it's an interview process. You get to interview the student. They also get to interview you to see if it's a good fit. And what they get is a paid internship, also the work experience, and then the college credit. And so where we are right now in our organization, we're in heavy fundraising mode. And so what we needed an intern for was grant research and funding research. And so that's what they are working on for the whole summer. We have them for 2 months. And then that frees our executive director up to go do whatever he needs to do, because there's now this intern whose sole focus is, I need you to find me $300,000 in grants by the end of July, right? And so it's, like I said, eBloomer is, they're not the only organization that does stuff like that. And so sometimes it's about working smarter, not harder. And if you don't have the resources or the staff to go out to your local universities, reach out to your local universities and say, hey, I need an intern. There are organizations who are doing this. There are students who need opportunities, and they just need to know where those opportunities are. So that's one resource. The other thing that I want to offer is, I think in terms of strategy and common strategy, that one thing that we miss is that our messages are too big, right? They're too broad, they're too wide.
That's right.
And we sometimes are so tethered to our work because this is what we do. That sometimes it takes someone from the outside who's saying, I understand this is a passion point for you, but you are all.
Well, what's the point?
And so we have actually contracted a communications agency who has just a fresh set of eyes, because they're not in the weeds of our work every day. And so they see things from more of a top-line strategy that's just like, this is great, but you want to do all of this, but you
Let's
cannot.
keep it simple.
And you're actually dividing your audience because they don't know what they should be focused on. And so we have a racial equity now cohort. And one of our organizations that came through the cohort is works in the area. They're birthing center, they staff doulas of color. And when she started in the cohort, she said, our mission is to eliminate the morbidity rates for Black women in Dallas. We're like, that is unrealistic. Like, and had to tell her, like, you're not going to do that by yourself. You're a community organization. You are not going to do that. But you can reduce the rates in a neighborhood. And so if you focus your strategy on the neighborhood as opposed to Dallas, because then those data points, you're going to funders and you don't have the data to support your mission. And so your mission looks like it's unsuccessful. But if you said, I was able to reduce morbidity rates in this 8-block radius, that is something that funders can get behind because it's impactful.
That's right.
So I think sometimes our focus is so broad because the need is great. There are so many things that we have to fix, but our strategy is as broad as our mission, and I don't always think that that's wisdom. So
drill it down,
I'm so
make it
glad that you
actionable.
said that. And we'll get to your question. I'm gonna hand out just this activity because that gets us to the activity I want you guys to. And if you finish it here, great. If not, it's something you can take home. But it's 4 components to how you talk about your work in a. I'm so sorry. This wasn't. I'm sorry. We're going to go through an activity where there's 4 components to how you can talk about your work. We call it an elevator pitch. We call it a spiel. But essentially, you want to think about if you're riding an elevator with, say, a funder, and you have to describe your work, its impact, who you've affected, and who you want to continue to impact. You can do that in a short, succinct way that they hear you, they engage with you, and they understand next steps. So I'm going to give you an example of a really good elevator spiel or a pitch. This is something that can translate to both your website. Your website should not be 25 pages of copy about who you are and what you do. To your point, people are not going to read all of that. You probably have a good 1.5, 2 minutes from people, and then they're gone. So again, this is a short activity. It's based out of a training that we generally do for our clients, so it is a longer, model. But I think having you guys in the room and after this discussion today, this is a good place to get started. And so as I'm passing this out, you can go ahead with your question.
But wait, aren't they gonna work on TRHT? Like what do they collectively at their tables think the main elevator pitch should be?
Yeah.
TRHT?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what they're gonna do with it.
Okay.
This is great. I just wanted to circle back around. I think, Katrina, you were the one that were talking about stories or data. And if you were in the session this morning, you heard a lot of discussion about how funders really push for data, and if it's narratives and stories, it quote unquote doesn't count. My response, I was with a family foundation in Dallas, Texas for 12 years, and one of the things, what came to my mind was there's lots of different kinds of funders. Go find the funders that do believe in stories and narratives and seek funding from them. The other thing is, speaking of resources and not having staff, and I'm going to brag on my niece for a minute. She would come in and intern in the Emory Family Foundation during the summers, and filing and all that good stuff. But she came to learn a lot about our nonprofit grantees, and we are a human rights funding organization. So when she graduated, she got hired into a small firm called 3 Box Communications. But because of her experience in working with us, she still had a driving passion and a fire in her belly to continue social justice work. And so she was able to convince 3 Box to put together a program called Impact for nonprofits, and they offer up, people apply, nonprofits apply, for a year of support through communication and PR work through 3 Box. And she's the one that pitched it, and they went with it. And this is like the 5th year that they are offering that out. So one of the things that I would suggest is, I told Teddy, really put forth what you are doing with this work, because there are a lot of communication organizations in Dallas. They could be doing the exact same thing. And a lot of them are, but you just don't hear that much about it. You have to go and find it. So that's just one idea to think about. Thank you.
I really love that too, in relation to what you were talking about in terms of data, that stories are data, and you can use stories as stories, but you can translate those stories into the data that a funder wants to hear.
Right.
You can do it. Or you can hire an organization that has some experience with that, but because it belongs to you. So or it belongs to the storyteller, but you can put it in a different format than a booklet or a little 15-second video. So I think.
Can I ask you a question as a fellow panelist? I would love to hear more about the impact of the narrative on the larger mission, because I don't think we got into that much today. And I think we all have access in the work we do to those types of narratives, but understanding how to collect them, to action them, to put data behind them sometimes is a little elusive. So I would just love to hear about some of the impact you've seen in the work you've been doing.
Well, my own methodology is this is why I don't call myself a qualitative researcher, even though what I do is actually qualitative research. I call it oral history methodology. And the reason I do that is because for me, oral history methodology puts someone's precarity or vulnerability or trauma within the context of their whole life. And the trauma or the vulnerability is a piece of their identity or a moment in their life, not their whole life. And so by doing that, then and framing any story we tell, whether it's the whole narrative, you can read the whole transcript from an interview, or if it's a little edited version of it, or it's a data point in a report, what we're doing is putting that person's life in context, and that then gives you a chance to do the asset-based stuff that you were talking about, right? People are overcoming so much every day with so little, and so what a funder then can help with that impact faster or with more resources. That's one thing.
So what you have in front of you now is just a brief activity. Feel free to jot notes on the back if you want. When you're thinking about the work and how you communicate the work of THRT, and how you're making an impact, either organizationally, individually, whatever makes sense for you, it's up to you. You want to think about the 4 pieces. You want to start with a strong opening. That opening could be a tagline like "Drink Up." It could be an interesting fact, like the one that you have on this example. Tonight, more than 1,300 young people will find themselves on the streets of San Francisco through no fault of their own. It could be a statistic such as that, or a brief story. The point is, it should be short, but it should captivate. It should get somebody into thinking, wow, 1,300 young people on the streets in one night? That's a lot of homelessness in one night. Imagine what that looks like over the course of a year or 2 years or 3 years. You should then figure out how you describe the need or the problem. What is the need? Obviously, we need housing for these young homeless people. What's your unique response? So you talked a lot about how your organization is building capacity, helping interns. How are you responding to the problem? And then what's your call to action? So once you're done talking to somebody, you don't want to just turn around and walk away, right? You spent time engaging them for a reason. What do you need from them? If it's a funder, maybe you're not asking for money right out the gate. Maybe you're saying, you know what, I'd love to spend some more time talking to you about how we can collaborate on a solution. Or I'd love to get 30 minutes of your time next week and go to lunch and just hear from you what some of your challenges and pain points are. Maybe we can find some synergy. Whatever it is, you always want to have an ask when you're done talking to someone or going through your elevator pitch. This is for your website, this is for social media, this is in person, this is no matter where you are, there should always be these 4 general components to how you tell your story and the impact that you're trying to make. So I'll give you guys about, we're a little bit low on time. I'll give you guys about 10 minutes. Just jot down some thoughts. If you have questions for us, we'll walk around. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. This is just to get you into thinking about how to really be concise about what it is you're trying to do.
And I think if you finish early, it would be interesting to try to create that same message repurposed for different channels. So this would be a lot of information to put into a social media post, for example. So how do you take that longer message you're going to write the way Nicole framed it for your website, or maybe a short blog post or something like that, or in prepping one of your thought leaders to do an interview with a media organization? How do you take that longer message, and what would you say if you were just going to make an Instagram post? What kind of visual elements would you add? It can be really, really helpful to get into the practice of creating a message and then repurposing it out, because then in one fell swoop, you're able to make sure that you're hitting all your channels in an appropriate way, the way those audiences are expecting to receive the message. So the more you get in the practice of doing that, the less time you'll spend trying to make sure that you've got that same type of content for all the channels that you're reaching your audiences.
Just also as a practical piece of information for you, we just did some research for the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. People spend on average about 30 minutes on Facebook, about 30 minutes on Instagram. On average, TikTok is open 9 times a day, maybe it's 8, and people spend 90 minutes a day on TikTok. So when you're thinking about, so now you can see why it's so much about the regulation of TikTok, right? But when you're thinking about social media, whether TikTok goes away or not in a year, or gets regulated or sold or whatever, think about where people spend their time and who spends their time there. So that's the demographic there as much.
Yeah, if you're writing something for Facebook, you're writing something for a typically older audience, you're writing for majority women. So then when you go to repurpose that for X, or formerly Twitter, you're looking at a career-aged audience, people that might have less experience with whatever you're talking about, lived or in their professional life. And it's predominantly men. So that message is going to change just a little bit between the one sentence post you put on Facebook and the one sentence post that you put on Twitter. So be thinking about the user of the platform you're writing for, the end user that's going to be receiving the message or encountering it in their feed. Remember, like she's saying, what if you were going to put it into a video content? How do you do that? What does that look like? How do you script that out for the thought leader that's going to be on that video, even if it's a 10-second video or a 30-second video, right? And different platforms have different, appropriateness for how long those videos are going to be based on the type of engagement you're trying to derive. But these are kind of all these things you need to be thinking about. Writing one sentence has never been so complicated, I think. But really be thinking about the channel. And maybe you don't use Facebook, so that's a channel that you don't have to worry about. But whatever channels you are using, there's data out there on who's using them, and then use your internal data to make sure that the people that are receiving your message, engaging with your posts, following you. Who are your followers? Are you checking? Are you following them back? What are their profiles? Are there people that are following you that surprise you? Like, you're not sure why this person might have followed you based on their profile description.
Are they real people?
Are they real people, right? And you can kind of tell that when just by looking at their profile. Do they have a picture? Do they have a description of who they are? Do they have 0 followers and they're following 0 people?
Or all their pictures uploaded in one day.
Yeah, and these are all important things to be considering as you're writing out these messages for your website, for a potential video, for Facebook, for X, for Instagram. Well, ladies, we made it.
We did, we made
I'm gonna grab some more water too.
I'm gonna go to the bathroom. Supposed to walk around.
Tech support. I put my backpack down on a pile of somebody's breakfast. I think it's hearty. Great questions. Really great comments. Communication strategy is complex and it's scary because you go out there and you put the wrong foot in the water and you're in big trouble. And even when your intention was perfectly genuine and sometimes even authentic, and sometimes that makes it even more painful if it doesn't go well. When you put your real self out there, or even worse, when you put someone that you've taken their oral history from and you've shared that in a way and then it gets a poor reception, or you haven't prepared people. Social media is social media, right? You're going to have fans and you're going to have haters, and you have to have a really thick skin because that's right.
Because if it's out there now, and I say yes,
You're right. Now I don't want, take that back. I don't want people contacting me. I've gotten a lot of bad, communications. Yeah, exactly. Have you experienced that?
well, not in a huge dramatic
Like unpublish me kind of way?
but please don't use my real name. I was
Oh, yes. Right. Mhm.
and asked
When it was
booklet
out
came
there.
out.
Mhm.
safety
And even the reception here in American culture, right? I mean, this is a hardened group of populace, and we're not always nice people here in this country. In fact, so
So she said we could still use her story, but friends' names out of it.
and any
And any
identifying.
identifying things.
Mhm.
Change her name.
Mhm. That's a really good point.
It costs some money because we had to reprint some
Right.
things, but we had to. We couldn't.
That's right. Because you're in partnership with the people that you're interviewing and the people that you're elevating their stories, right? And that happens sometimes in thought leadership too. Mhm.
It's what white UN workers
Right.
black and brown
That
bodies,
singular perspective I talked
either
about.
in cages,
Oh my
on
God.
beaches,
Oh my
or
Lord.
you know,
Yeah.
having come from
They're just in very vulnerable situations that they don't have control in.
spark someone to feel to
Because that does nothing to improve the power structure. It's reinforcing the power structure. And as hard as it is to say no to money, we didn't have time to talk about this today, but I think there is an end user kind of, sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought around, I had a thing I wanted to talk about today, but the conversation went in so many different places, but
Well, did you hear about this? I think it was called Code 2012. He was like an influencer, and he had a surfer dude guy,
Mhm.
he has blonde hair, and
Mhm.
Joseph Kony, and human rights
Right.
violations. So this guy created this whole video around the child soldier situation and murders that were happening. And so what you would do is you'd see this video, it was really like interesting. It showed images of child soldiers. It showed images of college kids, especially.
It's easy from a surface level to say, oh, I care about this. I don't want to see child soldiers.
Right. And then he used his own kid in a video.
Lord.
A little mini version of him. You know,
Best
like
practices 101, never put your own kid anywhere out there.
white, you know, this white surfer dude,
Yeah.
little kid. And the dad saying, "Who is that?" That's just.
Oh my
And so
goodness.
then
Yeah.
he got all these kids' T-shirts, and they're all wearing T-shirts that I donated to this cause.
Mhm.
It sort of was, you know, I forget what the term is. They call it now. It's activism, but like you just press a button, activism that makes you feel better.
Like
about
armchair
yourself.
activism. Yeah. Yeah, right. I donated $5, so I've done my part. Yeah. I think what I was going to say was about going back to kind of what you were talking about in the beginning there. Like it depends so much on what you're trying to accomplish with the work. So if you are selling something like in a B2C capacity to an end consumer on social media and your goal is lead generation or revenue sales, right? Versus the type more of the type of work we're doing where we're putting thought leaders out there to talk about something and to put a face to an issue and to tell our own personal, sometimes harrowing in your case, stories. That's a completely different purpose for the way we're using that. We're not trying to get someone to click and buy, right? It's so much bigger than that. And participation isn't necessarily directly tied to a $5 donation, a donate now button or something, right? My participation in that issue is so much more expansive. It's about the way I think. It's about who I hang out with. It's the stores I'm shopping at, right? Like, and so I think sometimes that gets, like, we get people that come to us for thought leadership and social media work, and they're like, well, you know, we're like, what's your goal? We'll do a strategy session, and they're like, well, we want to drive revenue, and it's like, well, okay, so there's a little bit of a disconnect between putting your CEO out there to talk about why we need to do X, Y, and Z, and people ultimately like buying some product, and I think that's a misuse of a thought leader, right? You know, think about how it kind of devalues that person's expertise by making them a spokesperson or like a car salesman, or ultimately whatever the message is, just metaphorically. So
I'll be right back and just get some water.
anyway, I think that goes back to what Nicole had been saying, just about, you know, really papering out that strategy, because if what you want to do is collect oral histories and you want to use those oral histories as a way to kind of amplify the message so you can reach bigger audiences and you can really get some clout behind the work that you're trying to do, you got to be really careful about the way that you're putting those people out there, right? And that was to come full circle to what you were saying in the beginning, is if you're not really intentional and really thoughtful and have that backup plan to reverse course if that particular person or thought leader. I'll give you one example from my world. We had a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, you know, publicly traded. It was a medical company, and they were providing rides and home access to elderly people that weren't able to get to the hospital. So good mission, all that's great. The company had been around 10 years. You know, they had a big following. Like I said, they were publicly traded. We published a story in the Wall Street Journal, and he had given a perspective. Now, we don't like ghostwrite things. I mean, everything we publish is what this person said, that we use their phrasing, we record it. I mean, it is literally their, you know, we edit and we help them kind of organize it into a way that's received well in news media, but like these are their ideas. And we published it in the Wall Street Journal, and there was so much backlash. And he ended up actually getting fired. His board fired him after the article was published. And I bring this up because what he ended up saying was, well, the way you want to do things in today's American economy is you outsource everything, and here's how we've been successful outsourcing jobs. And you can imagine how people were like, well, that's not a good thing. Like, you're killing jobs, and you know, you're underpaying people in other countries, and right, like the whole domino effect of that. And again, it was just, are you being really thoughtful about how this is going to be received and what you're going to do if it goes south? You gotta have a plan. When you're putting people out there, it's different than just a brand message, right? Which can still impact your brand negatively if it doesn't go well. But when you're putting a face to the message, I mean, there's an extra layer of being careful with respecting that person's humanity, respecting that person's reputation.
Well, we didn't get into this, but the session this morning, sometimes funders demand the stuff that is ethically bothersome.
Absolutely right.
And where, you know, they're sponsoring two students who are refugees at Virginia Tech, and the funder who funded their scholarships to be able to do that is insisting on meeting them at the airport when they arrive.
So strings
In a
attached.
good way or not?
I think the intention is there, but we're also trying
Are they trying to police? Do they like try to check it out?
trying to alert them to, like, when they very first arrive,
Wow.
they're going to be very tired.
Right.
Like anyone who
Right.
does international travel,
And imagine
doesn't
being-
not necessarily because they're refugees,
Right.
but then you add on top of that, they've never been to this country, and you know, so
It's overwhelming.
It's kind of this constant.
Well, the burden too, like knowing, like if I've been in this harrowing situation and by the grace of God, some generous person comes along and sponsors my way to a sense of freedom and autonomy that I've not had wherever I'm coming from. And then I get there and I have to meet this person who's like sponsoring me. Like there's a burden, like I owe this person something. Like, why are we adding that like emotional layer ethically? Right? Because then, like, it's kind of like being the anonymous donor versus being
Can't
the person
somebody
who wants
say
the
to the
credit.
funder, like,
Well,
look,
we have it, so they're not coming to the airport. But
Good for you.
I said, I'm sure there'll be an opportunity for dormitory and
The
so
time
life
zone
in the
and
U.S. for
right.
a little while first, and then let's have, and not just like
do a proper
one-on-one,
intro.
more of like a gathering.
Yeah.
Right.
So it doesn't
That's
seem
definitely.
so like what you're talking about, this sort of burden.
Like some indebtedness to this person I've never
Yeah,
met.
that's awful.
But I do think it comes from a good place. So yeah, just make the right
Yeah.
Session over,
Critical
right?
Good
point.
job, y'all.
Thank you.
Y'all
We're
did
gonna
so well.
close the session out?
Yeah.
Nicole, really quick, how do we access my co-founder? Like, I was hoping we'd be recorded so he could watch me. How do we? Is there going to be a
It'll be on the
transcript?
website.
Yeah, I think it was video.
Yeah.
Murray's video recorded it.
I'll double check with Sarah.
Yeah,
And
okay.
send an email, but yeah. Did you hear it's going to be on the website?
Yeah, that's what
Okay.
that's what she.
Or transcribed, or yeah, something.
Okay.
But
Every
just let us
session
know
would
how
be
we
on
can
Okay.
access it.
I'll
However
send-
that
yeah.
is.
I told Sarah I'd follow up and just let her know how it goes. So I'll ask her.
Will you thank Sarah too, from the bottom of my heart?
Thank
you
you so
for
much.
So grateful.
integrating
I'm so glad I
our
got to meet y'all and-
related but
yeah,
eclectic
absolutely.
experiences.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna follow all of you on LinkedIn. So if you see a request from
Oh,
Follow
good.
back
Yes,
happening.
Yes.
Okay, everybody. I don't know if this is working or if y'all can hear me, but we've come up on time. We were going to ask for a share out. I don't know if anyone's feeling brave and wants to read their. I'm seeing a lot of shaking no heads, so that's okay. That is okay. Feel free to take the activity with you. This is a work in progress. These are just the nuts and bolts for a really nice spiel elevator pitch statement piece. And then I believe all of our email addresses should be on the website following this. So if you guys have any questions, if there's anything that was not clear, please feel free to follow up with us and we'll take it offline and continue to engage. Thank
Happy
y'all
to
so
help.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you again, Nicole.
Oh, thank you.
Great. Yeah.